Robert F. Kennedy Jr. just went on a tear today. So we all know he's been making a lot of really pro-Israel comments, and that has been really disappointing to a lot of people because people wanted him to be as an independent, finally breaking away from the establishment narrative. So even people who are actually pro-Israel themselves, they just sort of hoped that there would be one politician, an independent politician, that would actually just buck the narrative and maybe say something a little different than what everybody else is parroting. But unfortunately, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is not that guy. He is that guy in a lot of other ways. He has a lot of great positions on so many things, but when it comes to Israel, he falls right in line with everyone else in politics. And this is why I want Epstein's client list, to be quite honest with you. I do. I'm not accusing him of that necessarily, but it is odd that every single politician in America just falls in line and parrots the same thing as if, you know, they've all been compromised or something. Either they've been bought or they've been compromised, like every single last one of them. And so this is why so many of us would like to see the client list. Just saying. Putting it out there. So RFK Jr., he goes on Fox News today and he essentially blames Palestinians for their own occupation. Watch this.
All of us saw the videos on social media of children in cages in Gaza, of Jewish bodies, of a teenage girl being abused in front of a crowd and people cheering, of, you know, bodies being paraded around in trucks. So to say that Israel is at fault for that is just perverse. And then if you look at the history of the region, anybody who, you know, believes that narrative, which is a propaganda narrative, should go look at Prince Bandar bin Sultan's speech in 2020. He was a great champion. He was the head of the Saudi intelligence. He was at all the peace negotiations. He's a huge champion, lifelong champion of the Palestinian people. And what he said again and again, the Palestinians have been betrayed by their leadership. You know, Yasser Arafat died a billionaire. Mahmoud Abbas, the current leader of the Palestinian Authority, is a billionaire. His sons are 100 millionaires. They keep their people in poverty. Again and again, the Israelis have offered peace on extremely generous terms. You know, the Ehud Barak in 2000 offered again and again, 1937, 1947, 2000. The Israelis have wanted to trade peace for land. And they, again and again, the Palestinian leadership has betrayed its own people by refusing to even negotiate about that or refusing to a counteroffer.
Okay, so did you hear what he said? They wanted to negotiate. The Israelis were trying to negotiate. They wanted peace in exchange for their land. And he says, so it's their fault. You know, if somebody comes knocking on your door and says, give me half your house, and you say no, and they say, see, they won't negotiate, terrorists. I mean, this is ridiculous. It's totally ridiculous for him to say, well, it's their own fault for their situation. The occupation is their own fault because the Israelis tried to give them peace in exchange for land. They wouldn't give up their land. Nobody's going to willingly give up their land. I mean, we're seeing that now with Ukraine and Russia and the situation going over there. And many of us have said Ukraine should negotiate the end of and say, okay, Donbass, Crimea, we're just going to have to negotiate this in exchange for peace. And they're not doing it because it's unnatural for a lot of people. Maybe it's the wise thing to do. And I think in the past, it absolutely would have been wise for the Palestinians to accept these deals. A lot of people see that now in hindsight. Hindsight is 2020. This is what we're trying to prevent with the Ukrainians and what is going on over there is hindsight, because we see what has happened when you continue to battle it out when there is a stronger opponent against you. So he is right in one way in that the Palestinians refused many times to negotiate. They felt like they were in the moral right, and they were in a lot of ways. They didn't want to give up their land. They didn't feel like they should have to. But the reality is it would have been wise for them to do that. But you can't blame them necessarily for not. You can't say it's your fault that the bigger, badder military has come in and it has now debilitated you. It's not your fault, but the continued aggression, the continued suffering. You could put an end to it if you were to negotiate. But that's just one layer of it that he's discussing. And that one layer would be fine and true enough if the Israelis actually held up their end of the bargain. And the reality is the reason why, and this is the very reason, the same reason why United States leaders, why so many Democrats who are salivating at the mouth for war with Russia, the very reason they use why the Ukrainians should not compromise and get to a peace agreement with Russia is why. Why do they say, no, we can't do that? Because it won't stop there. The Russians will not actually adhere to their promises. They will continue moving forward and taking more land. They'll say they're going to stop with Crimea and Donbass. They'll say that it's all ending, but they won't. They're going to continue to encroach and encroach and encroach. Interestingly, those very same people that believe that about Russia and Ukraine can't then seem to take that same exact thinking and apply it to Israel and Palestine. Or they say, well, no, it's the Palestinians' fault because if they just would have negotiated peace and they just would have accepted that Israel's going to have some of the land and then they could have the rest of the land, then everything would have been fine. But they keep fighting, and because they keep fighting, that is why then Israel continues to take more and more land. So you could apply the same principle to both to both conflicts, and you really truly can. The reality is that you are probably better off coming up with a negotiation and actually doing what you can to get to that peace agreement. But then on top of that, and where with the Israelis and the Palestinians, what has been the real problem there is that Israel hasn't held up to its side of the bargain. Pretty much never has Israel held up to its side of the bargain. They might think that they have in some ways, but they're not. They allow the settlements to go in. They allow settlers to continue going and taking more land, and they even promote it in a lot of ways. It's cheaper housing for people. They get subsidies if they go and live in some of these settlements. So there is that. But it's also the United States not holding Israel to account on that, not actually saying you've had this agreement and you must actually hold up to your end of the deal. We're not holding them accountable. However, we, of course, want to hold Russia accountable, right? There would be many people on the international stage holding Russia accountable, saying you can't encroach anymore. You're not allowed to. But the fact is, maybe they would, just like Israel is. And, of course, they're two different regions, two different groups of people, two different situations. So maybe one side wouldn't, these are all gambles that you have to take. But that is, you can't play the future game of, well, I'm not going to because it's hopeless if I do. You have to at least try. And that is something that needs to be happening with not only the Israelis and the Palestinians in this current conflict, but with Russia and Ukraine as well. And then we'll see what happens. And then when somebody misbehaves and they don't hold up to their end of the deal, then we can somehow admonish them in some way, shape, or form. But it is really, he has been educated by Rabbi Shmuley, who's really just told him his very propagandized one side of the story. He is not getting the full story. There is a lot of problems with Palestinian leadership. There's no doubt about that. There's been a lot of corruption. They do not have the best leaders. They have, in the past, turned their back on peace deals they probably should have accepted. But that still does not excuse human rights abuses. It does not excuse occupation. It does not excuse continuing to take people's land. There is no real excuse for that. And it is immoral. It shouldn't be doing, and it should be internationally condemned, but it isn't. That being said, of course, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has, once again, I mentioned this yesterday, but I'm mentioning it again today. He has announced that he is running as an independent. And he's ditching the Democrats, running as an independent. Many of us are, really, that's definitely the right move. He absolutely should be doing that. But at the same time, again, we would love to hear him saying more independent things, having more independent stances on things that matter. And Israel matters a lot because this one gets us into a lot of conflicts. We're talking about potentially marching into war with Iran and war with Syria, endless wars. Like I mentioned, this war, this battle between the Arabs and the Jews in that part of the world has been going on for thousands of years. We're not going to solve it. So if you are going to stand with one side over the other, rather than standing for peace in the Middle East, then you are standing on the side of war. And that is really the problem with his stance on Israel, is that it ultimately guarantees that we will be in continued endless wars in the Middle East. Just pick your battle against Lebanon, Hezbollah, Iran, Syria, you name it. We're in it, because if you're going to stand with Israel, you're going to be standing with them against a lot of neighbors that are unfriendly, or they're trying to be friendly, but they're, it's just such a complicated situation. We should not be involved. And it's really unfortunate, and it's really disappointing to see an independent candidate continue to basically use warmongery language and continue to put us in the middle of these endless, never-ending Middle East wars that have lasted thousands of years, and we're not going to solve it. So we should just not have anything to do with it. That's what we should be doing.